So, Matt, talk about the character that you play on Kingdom.
Uh, Ryan's Ryan Wheeler is my character. He is on the surface, in a nutshell. Oh gosh, this guy's so complicated. He's so hard to talk about. Ryan Wheeler is sort of incredibly complicated, sort of psychologically multidimensional guy who, on the surface, is somewhat of a golden boy, always well behaved and agreeable throughout his childhood, and a star athlete all the way through high school and college, national champ wrestler, All-American wrestler, went on to become an Olympian and represented the country in wrestling in the Olympics, and then parlayed that success into joining the UFC, and his all through high school and through college was taking fights, and has been training with the Kalina boys and with Coach, which is Jonathan Tucker and Nick Jonas, and then with Coach Kalina, Frank Grillo, since he was a teenager. Finds success in the UFC, can't handle success very well. Demons come out, drugs, sex, drinking, turns into somewhat of a monster, falls from grace, ends up in jail,
Yeah.
The beginning of, you have to make sense of all this. He's such a complicated character, but in essence is a guy who you see in the first season who returns very humbled from jail, and he comes back to the gym that used to be his home, and his family, and to find that his former fiancée Lisa is now with his former coach, and he's trying to put his life back together again, and doesn't want to fight again, but then ends up getting drawn back into the game, and it's a question of how he can balance the pressures that goes with that and the success. And ultimately, in the first season, you see a really humble guy who's being called a monster and a diva and all that. And you never see that. In the second season, he gets a little bit more momentum, and you start to see where they might be getting those references. And then in the second part of the second season, we find a guy who's, after the loss of his father that he was unfortunately involved in, he's lost and floundering and desperately trying to find any kind of footing. So on the surface, this is a long answer, but Ryan's a guy whose internal struggles are as difficult or more difficult than the physical struggles that he faces. And if anything, the physical struggles are a drug that anesthetize that, or dumb down those internal struggles.
I think the key there, I think what makes the show so powerful is that it is about a family, and you are this surrogate member of it.
The guy who comes back to town.
Right, yeah. So, it's almost Shakespearean, the drama of it.
Yeah.
It's all about lost chances and lost loves and surrogate fathers and all this.
You're so right. I do agree with the Shakespeare. You listen to any of Alvy's monologues, or that he has with his therapist, and there's a positively Shakespearean aspect to it of do I go out in the woods and just shoot myself? Limp off into the woods, and he's facing his mortality every day.
And there's this redemptive quality in what happens in the ring. I'm thinking, in the first episode of season 2, you've got this big fight, and it's a way of getting back on your feet, winning this thing. There's a real emotional interest that the audience has in the outcome of these things.
Yeah, 100%. That's something that, as an actor, the stakes are already high, and the psychology is complicated. As I said, served to us, in only a way that Byron Velasco could. But you drop it in the background of MMA, and then the stakes are, I said earlier, adrenalized. Everything is amplified by the stakes of fighting, because you know, any one of us can walk around afraid about something, or doubtful, or angry, or anxious, resentful about it, you know. But I think that the act of stepping into the cage brings you to such an elemental place, you know, with all those things. You're boiled down to the bare essence of who you are in that moment. It's survival. And so those fears are that's make or break. Everything else goes silent. You know, and so that's the exciting part as an actor, to have those built-in stakes. You know, I think it's like probably like a war film, or like a where your stakes are so apparent and so overt, and you literally are having to face them and try and vanquish them. I think that's like, it's the good stuff.
Yeah. So, talk about the physicality of it. Training, you know, getting your body in shape to go into the ring. How much of that did you do?
It is all inclusive. It's like, you know, it's an unavoidable part of the role, and those demands are, you know, as steep as, you know, look, when you're shooting a drama, it's hard anyway, because it tends to be a tricky schedule. You have a drama, an hour-long drama. You have sometimes, like with us, it's about like a 14 to 16-hour day, because you have 2 hours of makeup potentially in the morning with the tattoos and the fake ears and the whole thing, and then you shoot for about 12 hours or whatever, and then you get it all taken off, and there's the commute to and from, and somewhere in there you get up in the morning and you do either your boxing session, or your cardio, or your intervals, or whatever you got to do, and then at nighttime when you get home, hopefully you've eaten dinner at set in enough time to sort of have it digested by the time you get home, and go right to the gym and start your incredibly intense regimen there. So that's what the job entails, and so you can't escape it. But the benefit of that is you start walking around and living it all the more, because you're spending so much time in gyms training with other fighters, and then working out, pushing your body to the limits of other. And look, man, getting in that kind of shape is not easy. It's like really hard. Like I can get a six-pack for like a day or a week or whatever. Like you get some kind of thing you're doing. You know, the shirtless scene is coming up. You can do that and work your way towards that. But maintaining that type of physicality for 6 months potentially without being afforded the time to be doing a lot of training, it's hard. You know, look, maybe this is a better answer that's not as long. Like, it's a really challenging part of the process, and it's kind of a puzzle. You know, I have found things that work, and then sometimes I don't feel like they work, and it's a constant thing with the diet and I do know that my body has transformed. Like, I'm able to grow facial hair more than I've ever, because just everything has changed. And I remember I hadn't seen my agents in a long time, and I hadn't seen them because I've been shooting, and then they saw me after the first season, and they're like, dude, you look different. There's something, it kind of, I don't know.
Well, it definitely adds to the authenticity of the thing, just as a viewer, and you can definitely tell it informs your character.
It informs your behavior and mood. And by the way, when you start thinking of things differently, once you've learned more and more about mixed martial arts, you hold yourself differently. You find yourself viewing situations differently. You interact differently in the gym. You see some big dude and you're like, yeah, he can't fight, But then this season 2B, I had a really interesting training experience that was different than the first two seasons, because I started working with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Calavita, who's a professional, he's among being one of the greatest sort of calculus teachers in America. He also trains fighters and athletes in a very systematic, calculated way. And so instead of doing my normal training that I've been doing, I did only fighter-specific training. So we train your skills, and that's one thing. But then the putting weight on and transforming your body is a whole other thing. And so I did in season 2B twice a week. I would go with Juan Archuleta, who's basically Joe Daddy's right hand on the show, and he's a real fighter. And he and I was his training partner for upcoming fights that he had. And we'd go to this guy's garage at 6 in the morning twice a week, and just grind it out old school in the garage. And so I think my body probably looks different in season 2B than any of the other seasons, because it's wholly specific to that job. You know, it's really interesting, man. I mean, I'm trying to give you stuff that'll be quotable stuff that'll be worth you writing about, but it's crazy. My body's never been. I've been in shape. I've never been this strong. I just have never done anything like this. And it's required, because the last thing you want is fighters watching the show and going, he's full of shit. And you don't want to look like an underwear model. You want to look like a fighter.
Right. Yeah.
You know. So.
What would you say to somebody who had never seen this show? Obviously, you've got kind of a built-in audience with fans of MMA or MMA
Hopefully,
fighters. Yes, knock on wood. But what would you say to somebody who's like, I don't really have any interest in this world?
You know, the show is not about MMA. I mean, that's the thing. People respond to the heart of the show, and what it is, as you said, is it's a family drama. It's a dysfunctional family that has a lot. You know, it's a story of a dysfunctional family, but it's a story with a lot of heart. That you get invested in these characters on an emotional level in a way that you know. I think these are. I think the relatability of the show, I think it's more relatable than a lot of shows out there, because you're seeing a complete human being who's flawed, and we're unapologetic about the flaws. And so, you know, we expose the vulnerability of these characters and the multidimensionality of these characters, both in victory and in defeat. And that's where people really lean in and relate. Adding, again, the MMA element adds an electricity and explosiveness and heightened stakes, a heightened level of stakes that I think makes the show all the more addictive. Anyways, I think, you know, so like I said, at its core, it's this family drama that and I think that it is highly relatable. And the funny thing is, when fighters watch the show, I think they tend to relate to the characters on an emotional level more than the fighting. I think they go, oh, that's cool, or I've done that, or I remember being in that situation, or they can relate to it. But they're more about like, yeah, I remember having to fight after going through this horrible experience and what that walkout was like. And so it's always the heart of the show that I think draws people in.
Well, thank you so much.
Because I feel like
I could. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Dude, a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Pleasure too.